Inside the Los Angeles crime family. The early years of organized crime in California weren't all that different from its East Coast counterparts. It was marked by the division of various Italian street gangs and black hand organizations. And like many other cities early on, these mafia clans were fighting for racket control and to be the dominant organization in the area. The early Sicilian American underworld in Southern California was largely formed by the expansion of mafiosi who have relocated from the New Orleans area and a smaller portion from southern Colorado. The most prominent mafia clan in Los Angeles during the turn of the century was the Matranga family. Their legitimate business was fruit vending, but they were more focused on the illegitimate side of business. They used threats, violence, arson, and extortion to control the Plaza area, which was the heart of the Italian-American community in Los Angeles at the time. The first leader of the Matranga clan was Rosario Sam Matranga, who started leading the family around 1905. Sam's relatives, Salvatore, Peter, and Tony Matranga, were the other prominent members of their clan. The other prominent black hand leader in Southern California was Joseph Ardizzone. Ardizzone reached Los Angeles in 1901 after first settling in New Orleans, and then became a wealthy and politically connected rancher in the Los Angeles suburb of Sunland. There was little unity in the Sicilian underworld in Southern California at the time. He got involved in a dispute with George Maisano, a member of the Matranga gang. They both went to seasoned mafioso Joseph Cuccia to mediate the dispute. Cuccia was a well-respected criminal amongst the underworld and served as a translator in court for Italians who couldn't speak English. This made him a well-liked man in the Italian community. Cuccia happened to be a relative of Ardizzone's, so he ruled in his favor. The Matrangas were pretty pissed, and they weren't used to not getting their way. The respect they once had for Cuccia turned to disdain, and they even threatened his life. In response, Ardizzone went ahead and shot and killed Maisano. Immediately after the murder, Ardizzone fled the area to avoid authorities and became a wanted fugitive. With Ardizzone gone, the Matrangas fulfilled their promise of revenge. On December 25, 1906, Cuccia was suddenly ambushed and shot and killed, allegedly by Tony Matranga. With Ardizzone and Cuccia gone, the Matrangas became the dominant criminal force in the Italian Plaza community, with Sam Matranga emerging as the most powerful mafiosi in Southern California. To expand their power, they began cooperating with the police. Giving up information on their enemies and receiving immunity for most of their crimes allowed the Matrangas to expand their power and influence. Then Ardizzone would return to Los Angeles in 1914 and resume his feud with the Matranga family. He was acquitted of murdering Maisano in 1915 due to lack of evidence and no witnesses willing to testify. Once freed, Ardizzone went back to work. Then, shortly after Ardizzone's acquittal, Sam Matranga and his successor and brother Peter were both murdered within 33 days of each other in 1917. Mike Marino, an Ardizzone ally, was responsible for the murders. The Matranga clan's next leader, their cousin Tony Buccola, was able to get revenge and killed Marino in 1919. At this point, with all the murdering going on, the national leadership of the U.S. Mafia intervened, and the reigning boss of bosses, Salvatore Toto de Aquila, brought in experienced leaders to form an official family in Los Angeles. He installed Vito DiGiorgio from New Orleans to lead the family, and Rosario DeSimone from Pueblo, Colorado, to be the underboss of the new organization. The first thing DiGiorgio did was impose a truce between the various factions and induct some members from both gangs. Vito DiGiorgio is a black hander and a grocery store owner who moved to the United States from Palermo, Sicily in 1904, settling in New Orleans until 1920 when he relocated to Los Angeles. With the continuing Ardizzone-Matranga feud, DiGiorgio was able to bring some order to the Los Angeles underworld. Vito was a dominant figure in Southern California's Sicilian underworld and was known as an intimidating and forceful man who quickly fell into conflict with several local underworld factions. Soon after his arrival, he was targeted by assassins. He suffered gunshot wounds in an attempt on his life in July of 21, but he survived. DiGiorgio maintained strong connections with mobsters in New Orleans, Colorado, and Chicago, and was a cousin and close friend to New York City mobster Giuseppe Morello, the first boss of bosses of the American Mafia. DiGiorgio attended a mafia convention in Buffalo in the spring of 22. As he and his lieutenant Giovanni Lacasio headed home, they stopped to see some mobsters they knew in Chicago. On May 13, 1922, both men were at a pool room barber shop on Larrabee Street. Vito was getting a trim and Lacasio was shooting a little pool when a couple of guys came in, guns blazing, and shot and killed both men. As the 1920s rolled along, Ardizzone was rapidly expanding his power and influence. He partnered up with Jack Dragna, a new up-and-comer in the family, and started expanding their rackets in Los Angeles. Ardizzone and Dragna made a great team. Dragna helped him run his bootlegging operations and vice rackets, and the pair worked closely together for over 10 years. There was yet another making some noise in the LA crime scene, but he was working out of a different playbook. Albert Marco tried to seize control of Los Angeles in the 1920s, not by working with the local mafia, but with the politicians and the movers and shakers of LA. An important cog in their corrupt political machine was Charles Crawford, who was known as the Grey Wolf of Spring Street. He was a colorful figure in Los Angeles in the Roaring '20s. Armed with a flamboyant wardrobe and flashy diamonds, Crawford's viciousness and cunning helped take public corruption to a whole new level in Los Angeles city government in the 1920s. If there was a king of corruption, Crawford would certainly take that title. He ran city politics along with Kent Kane Parrott, a lawyer and political fixer who was often the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. This loosely organized crime syndicate operated by Marco, Parrott, and Crawford became known for their influence over the city's government and were referred to as the City Hall Gang. With Crawford and Parrott controlling City Hall and the local press, the City Hall Gang was able to operate bootlegging, prostitution, and legal gambling rackets in the shadows with very little law enforcement scrutiny. The connections created by Crawford's political machine transferred Marco into the Vice Lord of Los Angeles and allowed him to operate without much fear for prosecution of his crimes. Marco ultimately ran a couple dozen whorehouses scattered through the downtown district and staffed by about 200 prostitutes. According to the IRS, between 1922 and 24, Marco earned about $500,000 on bordello prostitution. Another important figure in the City Hall Gang was their hand-picked mayor, George Cryer. Cryer was the city's mayor between 1921 and 29, with Parrott and Crawford operating behind the scenes. It was obvious that Cryer was just a mere figurehead and that Parrott was the de facto mayor and also ran the Los Angeles Police Department. Milton Farmer Page was a career criminal and a large-scale gambling racketeer who was able to thrive in the midst of all the rampant corruption. Guy McAfee was a former firefighter who became a corrupt cop and the head of the LAPD Vice Squad. And at the same time, he was running gambling saloons and brothels. He was known as the Whistler because he would warn vice dens by calling them up and whistling a certain tune, and then complaining to his police cohorts there was no answer. Harold Happy Meltzker was the jack of all rackets. He was the international drug trafficker, bookie, pimp, and gambling racketeer. Not only did he benefit from the City Hall Gang, but he also worked closely with Mickey Cohen and the LA family. Tony the Hat was a notorious bootlegger, gambler, and entrepreneur who also worked closely with the City Hall Gang. He ran rum-running operations during Prohibition and later became famous for operating gambling ships off the coast of California. Marco's pride and lack of impulse control would bring his career to a screeching halt. He insulted a woman one night in a cafe, so her date invited him into the bathroom so they could fight. Marco accepts the challenge and takes a world-class beating before two of his lackeys come in to save him. They got the guy off of him and knocked him to the floor. Humiliated from that whooping he just took, Marco drew his gun and put a bullet in him. He was later found guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder and was sentenced to 2 7-year terms. Once paroled, Marco was immediately deported back to Italy. Marco's conviction, along with the reform movement of the late 1920s, crippled the City Hall Gang's power, which led to the various mob factions vying for control of the rackets the gang once controlled. The Matrangas' successor and cousin Bucala did a decent job trying to solidify the clan's power in the region, but they were just too crippled by the many years of violence. They were officially eliminated with Bucala's disappearance in 1930. It became clear that Ardizzone's faction won the war, and by 1931, he emerged as the top gangster in Southern California and had solidified himself as the boss of the LA crime scene. Under Ardizzone's tenure, organized crime began consolidating under his banner as he dominated criminal activities in LA. Besides Dragna, Ardizzone did have some relatives around that served as his lieutenants, such as 2 of his brothers, Stefano Ardizzone and Salvador Ardizzone, along with his cousin Niccolo Borgia. With the Matrangas gone, Ardizzone was enjoying his time at the top of the underworld and not having to look over his shoulder all the time. Then one day in October 31, Ardizzone went to visit a cousin of his and was never seen from or heard from again. Many believe it was the leadership of his own family that did away with him. The LA family continued under DeSimone with Dragna as his underboss. Now some sources have DeSimone retiring in 1925, and some claim he stayed in power till his death in 46. Nevertheless, once Ardizzone vanished and DeSimone was out of the picture, it was Jack's time to shine. He made peace with the bosses in New York and was made the official boss of the Los Angeles Borgata, and was even given a seat on the National Commission. The only boss west of Chicago to get that honor. The Dragna era of the Los Angeles Mafia marked the true beginning of the California crime family's golden age. During his tenure, the family would reach its peak in size and influence, although the road was a bumpy one for Dragna. The Dragna era was the best it got for the Mafia in California. The Dragnas, along with Adamo, dominated the Southern California underworld during this time. His brother was his most trusted advisor and was made consigliere of the family. One of the Dragna brothers' closest associates, Momo Adamo, was put in the number 2 spot as Jack's underboss. He was the only non-Dragna in the administration and wielded a lot of power early on. And they made sure to give young Louis a button as he was made into the crime family. When Prohibition ended, Dragna successfully pivoted his budding organization into new ventures like loan sharking and illegal gambling. Dragna also ran a lucrative protection racket. While most mobsters simply threaten harm to a business for not paying tribute to their organization, Dragna's family came up with a more sophisticated course of action. Dragna would send in men to threaten businesses, then the owners would pay Dragna for protection from these guys, oblivious to the fact that they were Dragna's own men. Although Jack and his men were not able to infiltrate many of the labor unions in the entertainment industry, he did control unions in the laundromat business, in addition to his dress importing companies, running offshore gambling ships, and of course a heroin smuggling operation. The Dragna family also made connections within the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, who were more corrupt than the city police. Although there was not as big a pool of Italians to recruit on the West Coast like there was back east, the LA family worked around this by accepting members from across the country, like Johnny Roselli from Chicago, Nick Licata from Detroit, Jimmy the Weasel Fratiano, and the Milano brothers from Cleveland. It seems the LA Brigada is made up almost entirely of transplants. Roselli had been a member of the Chicago outfit, but was dispatched to California to manage Chicago's interests and to work with Dragna to consolidate gambling in the region. Dragna and Roselli worked with corrupt political figure Joe Shaw, the brother of Mayor Frank Shaw, to muscle out LA bookies, many of whom fled to Vegas. Along with Roselli's support, Dragna's mafia organization ended some local faction wars by driving older City Hall gang racketeers Guy McAfee and Milton Farmer Page out of business. By 1937, the LA family controlled all illegal gambling in Los Angeles. Dragna is armed with top mafia hitmen Frank Bomp and Jimmy Fratiano, who have allegedly committed over 30 murders each on the orders of their superiors. Dragna was eventually able to muscle his way into controlling territory stretching throughout northern California and southern Nevada. These two renowned hitmen would give the family legitimacy, prove that they can make good on their threats, and instill fear when they needed to. Years later, they would be a detriment to the family, directly responsible for its downfall by breaking omerta and cooperating with law enforcement, the ultimate betrayal. Bomp was one of Dragna's top lieutenants. He grew up in Milwaukee and dropped out of school after the 3rd grade. He moved to San Diego as a young man in the mid-20s and got involved in organized crime by bootlegging alcohol coming over the border from Tijuana. He proved to be an effective hitman for the family and given a button by then-boss Joe Ardizzone. After seeing how fearless Bomp was, Dragna soon became his mentor. Impressed with the young criminal, Dragna finally made him a capo regime, placing him in charge of all the LA family's interests in San Diego. Bomp was tabbed by Dragna as one of the family's top extortion shakedown artists and hitmen in San Diego and Los Angeles, as well as the largest loan shark in the state. Following a 1968 arrest, Bomp agreed to become a confidential informant for the FBI, forever standing his legacy. The family would eventually discover his treachery, and on February 10, 1977, Bomp was put down by the family. He was shot and killed outside a phone booth near his home in San Diego. He was whacked out by Tom Ricciardi, with Jack Licicero getting the assist. Ricciardi hid near a payphone Frank likes to use near his home in San Diego. As soon as the Bomp finished his phone call and started walking home, Ricciardi popped out of the shadows and shot him to death at close range with a silenced .22 caliber handgun. And Licicero was waiting nearby with the car, and they made a clean getaway. Fratiano started his criminal career in Cleveland and built himself quite the criminal record out there, even serving a 7-year stretch for robbery. Fratiano earned his nickname Weasel as a boy running from the police in the Little Italy section of Cleveland. A witness watching the chase apparently shouted, "Look at that Weasel run!" and the police quickly attached the name to his criminal record, and it stuck. He was paroled in 1945 and moved to Los Angeles, California, where he bounced around working for Mickey Cohen and various Dragna family members before he settled in as one of Jack's top hitmen. Fratiano's most infamous hit was the brazen double homicide of the two Tonys, Anthony Brancato and Tony Trombino. Two Kansas City wise guys who were looking for some action and decided to relocate and make some moves out west. Anthony Brancato was sort of a freelance mobster. After running amok in Kansas City, Brancato decided to take his services out west. He briefly worked for Mickey Cohen before Mickey got tired of dealing with him and he was on his own. Brancato frequently teamed up with fellow Kansas City criminal Anthony Trombino. The two men were arrested 46 times in total on charges ranging from robbery to rape to assault. The pair were longtime partners in crime, which earned them the moniker the Two Tonys. Their first brilliant move was robbing the cash room of the mob-owned Flamingo Casino in Las Vegas. A casino executive recognized them because he had been robbed by them previously when he ran a bookmaking operation in Beverly Hills a few years back. They were promptly arrested, made bail, skipped, and then went into hiding in LA. Shortly after that, the two Tonys cheated a gambler out of $3 grand by posing as collectors for the mob. They pocketed the cash knowing that it was supposed to go to the family. Dragna had enough of the two Midwest transplants and ordered their deaths, giving the contract to Fratiano. Jimmy was able to set up a meeting at the home of a neutral party and offered them a chance to rob an unprotected high-stakes poker game. Fratiano reeled them in with the prospects of the take being as much as 40 grand. With a complete lack of intuition, the two men quickly agreed. Apparently, these guys were more greedy than smart. With Fratiano running the show, the rest of the hit team consisted of Charlie Bats Battaglia, Leo Lips Masseri, and Angelo Polizzi. Jimmy laid out the plan. They were to meet up with the two Tonys at a designated place on the street. When the two Tonys pulled up and parked down the street, Battaglia and Fratiano exited their car and entered the rear seat of the two Tonys' car. Fratiano immediately pulled his gun and shot Brancato in the back of the head. He then turned toward Trombino and emptied his gun into him. The nervous Battaglia sat still and was unable to draw his weapon. Fratiano screamed at him and he finally pulled his gun and fired once. Once the firing stopped, the pair hopped out of their car and got back in the hit car, which was driven by Polizzi, and they took off, followed by the crash car, which was driven by Masseri. Jimmy's downfall would actually stem from helping another family. Fratiano's friends in Cleveland had a major problem with Irish gangster Danny Green and couldn't seem to kill him, so they reached out to the LA family for a little help. They were happy to oblige and sent LA wise guy and hitter Ray Frito to give him a hand. It seems those Cali boys did something that those Cleveland guys couldn't, because on October 6, 1977, Green was blown to bits by a car bomb outside his dentist's office. Although soon after, Frito was arrested for murder based on a detailed sketch by an eyewitness. Frito implicated Fratiano in the planning of Green's murder, and he too is indicted for charges related to the bombing. Fratiano then also flipped and agreed to become a witness against the mafia. He pleaded guilty to several murders, and in exchange for his testimony, he received only a 5-year sentence, of which he only served 21 months. After helping the government secure convictions on several high-ranking mafiosi, Fratiano entered the Witness Protection Program, but was expelled after the Justice Department claimed it had spent almost $1 million on the Fratianos in 10 years. While Dragna was the most successful boss the LA family has ever had and brought the LA Mafia into the national stage, he's often given the reputation of a weak ruler and is best remembered for his failures. Which he did have a few. He failed to stake a claim in the lucrative gambling operations in nearby Las Vegas, and most notably he failed to eliminate rival Mickey Cohen, despite repeated assassination attempts in the late 40s and early 50s. Although apparently he did earn Cohen's respect. According to Mickey, Dragna was very powerful and very well respected. He just didn't put things together the way the East Coast bosses preferred. Another out-of-state gangster who would make their new residence on the West Coast was Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. When New York mob leaders Lucky Luciano and Mayor Lansky sent Siegel to Los Angeles to watch over their interests on the West Coast, he formed an uneasy partnership with Dragna. Siegel was a clever silver-tongued gangster who weaseled his way into Hollywood circles, making a fair number of connections with some of the era's rising stars and infiltrating several movie industry unions, which he of course would then extort, earning a pretty penny. Siegel did try to help out Dragna. He was able to get some of the independent bookies to pay tribute to Dragna's already flourishing gambling business. However, Dragna resented Siegel's ability to infiltrate unions in the movie industry that his guys couldn't. Siegel made millions extorting movie production companies and only had to pay Dragna a tribute for operating in his territory. With New York on Siegel's side, there was little Dragna could do to take control of the commission's grip on the city. The main reason why Siegel came to California was to organize the horse racing wire service on the West Coast for the National Syndicate, which Siegel and Dragna worked closely together on setting up. Dragna and Siegel tried many methods to take over the Continental Press Service, which was the main wire service at the time. Attempts to buy out the company or strong-arm its owners did not work, so they set up their own wire service company called Transamerica. The Chicago outfit eventually took over the rival Continental Racing Services and gave the entire percentage of the racing wire on the West Coast to Dragna, which enraged Siegel. Siegel had bigger problems to contend with. Ben got wrapped up in the Flamingo project in Vegas, which consumed him. He was in charge of designing and building the resort casino, despite not having any experience in either. The project would be the death of him, literally. It directly led to his fallout with the New York families, which subsequently led to his demise. And with his demise came the rise of Mickey Cohen. After Siegel's death, his chief lieutenant, Mickey Cohen, took over his remaining gambling and loan shark operations in Los Angeles. Cohen didn't show Dragna the same respect as his predecessor. Instead, he started growing his own family, and for a time it looked as if it might rival Dragna's. Cohen refused to pay tribute to Dragna. He did whatever he wanted, whether it pissed Jack off or not, he didn't care. Now viewing Cohen as a threat, Dragna tried to recruit some of his Italian men and killed countless others. And he was successful at both, crippling Mickey Cohen. Dragna first began recruiting guys like Dominic Brucklier and Peter Milano into the family, and killing his other men such as David Ogle, Frank Nicoli, Nettie Herbert, and Hookie Rothman. Dragna didn't get John Stampinato. He was killed by his movie star girlfriend's daughter. Cohen refused to fall in line behind Dragna, so Jack saw this as an opportunity to eliminate him. However, through sheer luck, Cohen survived many attempts on his life. In 1951, Cohen was in prison for tax evasion, and like a swarm of bees, the LA family moved in on his gambling operations. Tom Dragna was a primary planner in some unsuccessful attempts on Mickey Cohen's life. Dragna was an expert in dynamite and set up the 2 bombs that were planted in Cohen's home. The first one didn't go off after the fuse failed to fully light. The second time the bomb went off, but was placed near a safe, which shielded Mickey, saving his life. According to the book The Last Mafioso, Tom Dragna had the best aim with a gun in the entire crime family. When Jack died in 1956 and Frank DeSimone was named his successor, Tom resigned from the criminal life. He still remained close to the crime family afterwards, however. As consigliere, Tom was able to propose his son Louis and make him into the family as an official member. Louis Dragna spent 2 years in college and then became involved in the crime family in the 1940s. He was eventually promoted to capo regime by his Uncle Jack. Louis's Uncle Jack had a close relationship with New York boss Tommy Lucchese. Noticing the lack of labor rackets during the 1950s, Lucchese wanted to help out his friend. So he sent over his top labor racketeer Johnny Dio to teach Louis how to manipulate labor unions in the garment district. Johnny Dio was considered one of the best, if not the best, labor racketeer in the country. And Louis was a bright young man, so Jack was hoping that giving Louis this sacred forbidden knowledge would translate into big profits in the future. It most certainly did. Dio's teachings did not get wasted on the younger Dragna. Proof's in the pudding. Louis Tom's company, Roberta Dress Manufacturing, was turned into a $10 million a year company. It was an end of an era. The Los Angeles mob was dealt another blow in 1956 when Jack Dragna, their beloved boss, died of a heart attack, and Frank DeSimone, a former lawyer, took over. DeSimone was one of those rare mobsters who was able to live a double life. He had one foot in the underworld and the other in the professional world. After passing the California bar exam, DeSimone became a lawyer in May of '33, and apparently he was a decent one. Lawyer by day, gangster by night, Frank was active in the rackets and even planned and participated in hits while he was actively practicing law, and he was the getaway driver in one of the many botched Cohen hits. Frank was also the attorney of some mob guys such as Jimmy Fratiano and Johnny Roselli. Interestingly, it was Roselli who was also in the running to be boss after Dragna died, and was largely considered the logical choice. Frustrated that DeSimone was chosen over him, Roselli departed back to Chicago. He, along with others, believed that DeSimone rigged the voting. DeSimone was present at the ill-fated Appalachian meeting, which would turn out to be detrimental to the Los Angeles administration. When the meeting was raided by the police, DeSimone was outed as a mobster, which would ruin his law career. He previously had no arrest record and was believed to be a simple lawyer. He was there with his underboss, Simone Scazzari. Scazzari was a career criminal who migrated to the U.S. in 1923. He was arrested several times for illegal bookmaking and was involved in one of the unsuccessful attempts on Mickey Cohen's life. He was a huge earner for the family and owned the Venetian Club in Los Angeles and had large real estate holdings. The Appalachian meeting was a disaster for him too. Scazzari came under law enforcement scrutiny after the meeting and was deported back to Italy in 1962 for being an illegal immigrant. DeSimone wasn't a fan with the rank and file. After you hear about this next incident, I'm sure you'll see why. According to FBI files and informant testimony, DeSimone apparently raped the wife of former underboss Momo Adamo. Now, it's possible it could have been consensual. We weren't there, and details tend to change in stories like this. Whatever the case, they had sex, and that's the detail Adamo's having a big problem with. It was too much for Adamo. He went mad and shot his wife and then himself in an apparent murder-suicide. That didn't quite go as Adamo imagined, because his wife would survive the ordeal, and he would not. This meant the entire administration from Dragna's era, the boss, underboss, and consigliere, were all taken off the board almost immediately after DeSimone took charge. With DeSimone at the helm, the family slowly began to fall apart. It became apparent that DeSimone was inept as boss. It got so bad that New York mob boss Joe Bonanno plotted to have DeSimone killed for failing to exploit the criminal opportunities in LA. The hit was eventually called off, but it caused DeSimone to become very paranoid, never leaving his house at night. DeSimone's unsuccessful reign concluded with his death in 1967, after 11 years in power. Nick the Old Man Licata was next up to take the throne. The former cafe manager has served in every administrative position. He served as both DeSimone's consigliere and underboss, so he was the logical choice to succeed him. He had strong ties with mafia families all over the country, and was related by marriage to Black Bill Tocco, a Motor City Mafia don. Licata had high hopes for restoring the declining family, but he and his men were constantly being watched and tailed by the feds, making it hard to make any significant moves. And with all the police reform going on at the time, his men found it difficult to infiltrate law enforcement. Licata had the best intentions, but because of the watchful eye of the law, he wasn't able to do much better than DeSimone. Probably the most notable thing Licata did was preside over a new wave of recruits, finally getting some new blood into the family. When Licata was elevated to underboss from his consigliere position, family old-timer Tommy Palermo was promoted into the administration as a new family counselor. As an unconventional mafioso, Tommy largely stayed out of sight. Jimmy Fratiano stated that he barely ever saw him, and that he received his position due to nepotism. He's a cousin to Frank DeSimone and also to Joe Savello, the boss of the Dallas Borgata. When he moved from underboss to boss, Licata would elevate Joe Dippolito to underboss. The Dippolito boys were mob legends in Cali. Joe's father, Salvador Dippolito, known as Charlie Dip on the street, was a popular wise guy in LA, and Joe followed his pop into a life of crime. Charlie Dip, known as a big earner with a hustler mentality, bought a bunch of diamonds during a Great Depression in New York dirt cheap and resold them in Ontario and Los Angeles and made a killing. They would use that money to start several successful businesses, including a liquor and market store, a hotel, and extensive wine vineyards. The Dippolitos became prominent and powerful men in their region. They were involved in many real estate land deals and produced various grapes for winemakers in California. Just like his old man, Joe Dip was not only a top earner in the family, he was also a very capable killer. He was a big muscular guy who Jimmy Fratiano said was built like a heavyweight wrestler. When Fratiano was ordered to take out Cohen crony Frank Nicoli by Dragna, the Weasel wanted to get Joe Dip in on the hit. Jimmy invited Nicoli to his house over Labor Day 1949 for some beers. As they're hanging out, there's a surprise knock at the door. Jimmy answers and invites in his new guest, who is of course Joe Dip. Jimmy asked Nicoli, "Have you ever met Joe Dip?" Dippolito shook Nicoli's hand and then quickly wrapped him in a reverse bear hug. Fratiano then placed a rope around his neck and choked him to death. Afterwards, Dippolito buried Nicoli's body with a sack of lime in his large wine grape vineyard. The Dippolito grape vineyards became a popular place for the LA Mafia to bury bodies. This rope technique was a popular way to whack somebody in California and was often repeated. LA wise guys even gave it a name, calling it the Italian rope trick. Joe Dip rose through the ranks pretty quick and was promoted to underboss by Licata when he became boss in '67. Joe Dip was highly respected and liked by everyone. He was seen as Licata's successor, but died unexpectedly of a heart attack in January of '74. Only a few months later, on October 19, 1974, after a long battle with illnesses, Nick Licata died at the age 77. With Dippolito and Licata both dying in the same year, 1974, left some holes in the administration. The one caused by Dippolito's passing would be filled by Samuel Ciartino. His tenure as underboss would get cut short by the Weasel when he was snared in a racketeering extortion indictment along with Brooklier and a few other family heavyweights based solely on Fratiano's testimony. He would get convicted based on his involvement in extorting pornographers and handed a 4-year bid. All his co-defendants were convicted but only got a few years. Wise guys are usually hammered in federal court. This seems like a rare instance when they're shown mercy. Prosecutors were angered by those light sentences, claiming they all should have gotten 20 years. I'm sure no one's feeling bad for them. Licata's successor, Dominic Brooklier, was initially able to stabilize the family's businesses, but later endured a rat infestation which caused considerable damage caused by FBI informants. Like I mentioned earlier, when Brooklier moved out west, he was running gambling racket for Mickey Cohen in the 1940s under the name Jimmy Ragaisi. Apparently he had much bigger aspirations. Plus, he was an Italian working for a Jew. In his line of work, being Italian is like having a winning lottery ticket, and he wanted to cash in. So when Dragna made his rounds trying to poach Cohen's Italian guys, he didn't have to do too much convincing to get Dominic to switch teams. On a side note, I always thought it was a bit of a head scratcher that LA had a boss with a last name that didn't end in a vowel. Well, he apparently had it changed at some point. He was born Domenico Bucciolere. Apparently, disguising his name was a favored move for Dominic. During the early stages of his career, he went by the alias Jimmy Ragaisi, then later changed it to a variation of his birth name that doesn't look or sound Italian, in an effort to deceive law enforcement and stay off their radar. Of course it didn't work. These deceptive moves weren't very effective, unfortunately. Dominic did a lot of time behind bars. As boss, Brooklier was able to make a lot of money in pornography, extortion, and drugs, but wasn't able to take back control of the many independent bookmaking rackets in Los Angeles. Brooklier later put a hit on Fratiano because he was presenting himself as boss when Dominic was locked up. In return, Fratiano flipped and gave testimony that helped convict Brooklier of racketeering and extortion. Brooklier still ran the family from his prison cell, then in 1984, when he was in the final year of his 5-year sentence, he died of a heart attack. With Brooklier's imprisonment in 81, Capo Peter Milano quickly stepped up as acting boss and began running the family. He then became the official boss upon Brooklier's death in 84. Milano did the best with what he had and managed to provide an era of much-needed stability for the family. Born in Cleveland, Ohio, with heavy mafia pedigree, Milano embarked on a life of crime at an early age. His dad was the underboss of the Cleveland family for over 4 decades, and his uncle was boss for half of one, until he hightailed it to Mexico to avoid a tax evasion conviction. Milano moved with his family to Beverly Hills, California in the early 1940s as a teenager. After graduating high school, Milano went to work for Mickey Cohen running illegal gambling rackets. He was another one recruited by Dragna and got made in the family in 1970. He proved to be an exceptional earner and was promoted to capo regime shortly after. Once he took the throne, he made his brother Carmen the underboss and took charge of the depleted family by successfully having independent bookmakers pay tribute to the family, which was already heavily involved in extortion. Peter made a lot of money legitimately as well. He invested heavy in real estate and owned the Rome Vending Company of San Fernando Valley. Throughout Milano's reign, the family was heavily involved in narcotics, pornography, gambling, extortion, and loan sharking. He also worked to rejuvenate the family by opening the books and moving into new rackets. Other than a couple short bids, Milano managed to avoid major indictments, and after serving 28 years as boss, died a free man in 2012 at the age of 86. One of the first moves Peter made as boss was to promote his lawyer brother as his underboss. They chose completely different paths coming out of high school. After they graduated, Peter decided to stay in Los Angeles and work for Mickey Cohen, while Carmen went to law school and joined a fraternity. Carmen would actually get through law school, pass the bar, and become a lawyer, and he actually thrived in the professional world. Milano would host parties at the Italian-American Brotherhood Club in Cleveland's Little Italy in the late 70s. The club was owned by Carmen's father and was attended by mobsters, businessmen, and politicians alike. During the 1970s, Milano was paid a retainer for very few, if any, legal services to Teamsters Local 410 and 436, which were labor unions his father controlled. Milano was eventually disbarred from practicing law in an incident involving fraudulent workers' compensation claims. So in the early 80s, Carmen decided to move back to California, where his older brother was now running the crime family. Carmen Milano was inducted into the family in early 1983, and in what seems like an obvious act of nepotism, was immediately promoted to underboss. Carmen was once described by an informant as a pot-bellied down-on-his-luck hobo, but he was much tougher than he looked. He was tougher than his brother. He had a reputation and wasn't afraid to mix it up. Years later, Carmen would have a falling out with his brother, move to Vegas, and become an FBI informant. Born in Palermo, Sicily, Jack arrived to the line of opportunity in 1938 and lived in New York for a while until he moved west to Los Angeles in 1949. At some point, LaCicero joined the LA crime family and was a loyal soldier for Dragna for years. Jack was one of the family's top extortionists and bagmen. He was effective at extracting protection payments from extortion victims. Things really started moving for Jack when he was put on the Bomp and hit as a getaway driver. He was rewarded for his part and given the Bomp's old position as consigliere. Jack was also wrapped up in that racketeering extortion case in 1980 thanks to Fratiano's testimony. Being as old as he was at the time, Jack was only handed a 2-year stretch. Jack's prison term effectively ended his mafia career. Once he got out, he lived a quiet life with his family, enjoying his retirement. Jack died January 28, 1990 at the age of 78. He was the last consigliere of record for the LA family. Originally from New Jersey, Siegel was a prominent figure in the Los Angeles and San Diego rackets. He was involved in armed robbery, murder for hire, extortion, and narcotics trafficking. He was originally an associate of Mickey Cohen before switching over to the LA family. Siegel and Cohen still maintained a good relationship and helped each other out when needed. Knowing this, Dragna gave the contract to take out Mickey Cohen to Siegel. Siegel became an underworld legend when he refused an order by Jack Dragna to kill his friend Mickey Cohen. He gained a lot of respect in the underworld for standing up to Dragna, but the move killed his status within the family. Jack didn't kill him though. Siegel was a huge earner and gave up a piece of his lucrative bookmaking business to Dragna, and Jack wanted to keep those envelopes coming. Siegel eventually got into the boxing rackets, and in 1961 he was convicted alongside Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo for muscling in on the manager of welterweight champion Don Jordan to acquire a piece of his purse, but instead they acquired a 20-year prison sentence. Another East Coast transplant, Casey grew up in western New York and originally came up in the Buffalo family. His Buffalo cohorts named him Torchy for his work as an arsonist. Casey would take an arson conspiracy pinch in 1972 and received 3 years in state prison. Released sometime in the mid-70s, Jimmy moved out to California where his brother was already living and transferred to the LA family. He was put in Mike Rizzatello's crew and quickly proved to be an exceptional earner, operating a huge bookmaking and loan sharking business. He also made a significant amount of legitimate money. He owned his own construction company and was the owner of a restaurant and nightclub in New York and California. It didn't take long before Casey was promoted to capo regime by boss Peter Milano and eventually skippered 2 crews, one in Palm Springs and the other in Las Vegas. He was even made street boss for a while when both Peter and Carmen were sentenced to prison in '88. In August of '96, Casey was sentenced to 42 months in prison for conspiracy and wire fraud for his role in a telemarketing scheme that victimized over 100 people in the Midwest. The crew operating that racket were kicking up to him, so his conviction stemmed from simply receiving envelopes. Like a good mafioso, Casey remained active as a loan shark in Palm Springs and Las Vegas until his death in 2011 at the age of 86. Jimmy's most trusted lieutenant was his brother Charles, although nobody ever called him Charles. That's because he went by his stage name Bobby Milano. Charles was the first Casey brother to come to California, but he didn't come to set up some choice rackets. He wanted to be a famous singer. Casey happened to be a gifted singer and tried to cash in on his talent. His style was more of a lounge or nightclub singer. He never released an album, but he has a handful of singles out there. When he didn't have a gig, he was out there robbing and stealing. He would eventually get busted and get convicted of a string of armed robberies and get sent to Attica State Prison. While inside, he would meet Steven Sino and the pair would become close friends, both moving to Southern California once they were released in the late 70s. He would actively lead a dual life for a while until he finally gave up the music act and fully immersed himself into the mafia life. Charles was a big tough guy and would settle into the role of an enforcer for his brother. The Casey brothers' top lieutenant and most trusted underling was Steven the Whale Sino. Sino met Bobby Milano while locked up in Attica. He formed a tight friendship with Charles Casey and the pair would relocate to Los Angeles and get transferred to the LA Borgata. Sino maintained close ties with New York mobsters and acted as LA's liaison to the Buffalo family. Sino often operated in Las Vegas and was involved in the last mob murder attributed to the LA family, and that was the murder of Chicago outfit associate Fat Herbie Blitzstein in Las Vegas. With his old boss Tony Spilotro dead and gone, Blitzstein was vulnerable. Guys from the LA and Buffalo families first conspired to rob Fat Herbie, but I guess they thought about it and figured might as well kill him and take over his highly lucrative loan sharking and auto insurance fraud rackets. The guys involved would get tried for Blitzstein's murder but were acquitted. He wouldn't escape prison completely though, as he was found guilty of extortion. Born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada in 1927, Rizzatello would later move to New York and end up in the Gallo crew working for Joey Gallo during the 1950s. During the Gallo War, Rizzatello was one of Joey's key gunmen and allegedly participated in the murder of a couple Profaci guys at the Hi-Fi Lounge in Brooklyn in November of '61. Rizzatello would eventually move to California and transfer to the LA family, working as a debt collector and extortionist and get mentored by Joe Sica. In 1962, Rizzatello was arrested by the NYPD for a string of robberies of restaurants and businesses in the Hollywood area and served 9 years following his conviction. Well known for his brutality, Rizzatello embraced the violent side of the mob life. He quickly became well respected and was a large cash earner for the family and was promptly promoted to captain of the Palm Springs crew. Rizzatello got into an extortion money dispute with the chief financier for the Mustang Club in Santa Ana, which was a strip club that's been making monthly protection payments to Rizzatello. Mike Rizzi and an associate attacked him in an empty parking garage and shot him 3 times in the head. Remarkably, he survived the ordeal but was left permanently blind. Of course, he would go on to name Rizzatello as his attacker, earning him 33 years in prison, where he would die in 2005 from cancer. Salvador Piscopo, a name despised in Southern California but pretty much unknown everywhere else. He was an FBI informant long before Bomp and Sarah and Fratiano, but I guess he didn't write a book about it, so maybe that's why it stayed so obscure. Piscopo got close to Johnny Roselli. He was his protege and functioned as his driver and secretary in the 1920s. He began running a large gambling and bookmaking operation and was considered one of Roselli's top lieutenants. Piscopo would flip in '64, becoming a confidential FBI informant, giving the feds a scoop on the LA family, and eventually he'll betray his old friend and mentor by disclosing to the FBI Roselli's true identity. Roselli eventually found out. Infuriated, he went to DeSimone for the green light to have him clipped, which DeSimone would surprisingly refuse due to his intense paranoia of law enforcement at the time. He just told everybody not to deal with him. The move confused the rank and file and evaporated any respect he had left from his men. DeSimone was so terrified of law enforcement he barely left the house, let alone lead a crime family. And he allowed this guy to continue to exist in LA until he died from natural causes at 84 years old. Other notable LA wise guys from back in the day. Joseph Adamo was sponsored into the family by his brother and underboss Momo Adamo and placed in Bomp and San Diego-based crew. He would then take over the San Diego crew and DeSimone took down Bomp and promoted him. An August 1968 report on an anti-racketeering investigation into LCN activities in San Diego described Adamo as an ineffective leader. Born and raised in New York, Iannone served in World War II as a staff sergeant for the U.S. Army and was even a POW in the Philippines before coming to LA and jumping headfirst into a life of crime. Former Cohen lieutenant who had switched alliances to LCN and may have been among the first Italian affiliates of Cohen's to be poached by the Dragna group. Angelo Polizzi was a former Dragna hitman whose involvement in the Two Tonys hit was the catalyst for him to evolve into a powerful family captain. The great Leo Lips comes from a long line of mafiosi. He began his career as a Dragna family hitman and transferred to the Cleveland family to work with his cousin, boss Jack White Licavoli, who would then make him his underboss, and Lips would be the very first casualty of the Cleveland mob war with Danny Green. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, Ricciardi was with the Profaci family early on and a close associate of Joe Colombo before he was boss and just a Profaci hitman. Interestingly enough, when the Profaci Gallo War broke out, future LA wise guys Ricciardi and Mike Rizzatello were on opposite sides of the conflict, Rizzatello with the Gallos and Ricciardi with the Profaci side. Ricciardi and Colombo were both at the Hi-Fi Lounge when Rizzatello and another Gallo warrior busted in and took out two Profaci guys. Ricciardi attempted to intervene and was wounded in the process. He moved to California after the incident and became affiliated with the LA family and put in Fratiano's crew. Then taking out Bomp and really put him on the map and earned him his button. Another Dragna hitter who came up in the Fratiano crew, Charlie Betts, did not like DeSimone, so when he became boss, Battaglia transferred to Joe Bonanno's mafia faction in Arizona. It appears he didn't like that too much because when DeSimone died, he transferred back. Here we go, current and possibly last boss of the LA family, Tommy Gambino. Born in 1964 in New York City, Tommy Gambino is the son of Gambino family heavyweight Rosario of the Cherry Hill Gambinos. He was raised in New Jersey before moving to Palermo, Sicily. Tommy moved back to the U.S. in his early 20s, settling in California, where he worked as an investment banker and a property developer. While his father was in prison, Tommy would help run his day-to-day business on the street. His father was good friends with LA Captain Jimmy Casey and introduced the two, which led to Tommy being inducted into the LA family by Peter Milano in the early 2000s. Tommy was well respected due to his father, his uncle John Gambino, and his cousin the late Frank Cali, and maintained strong ties with the Gambino family in New York. After Peter Milano's death in 2012, Tommy was made official boss of the LA Brigade, or what's left of it. The Los Angeles family allegedly has around 10 current made men that Tommy oversees. More notable LA wise guys from the more recent years. The Los Angeles crime family has made moves and inroads into Las Vegas, but the blowback following the Blitzstein murder has put the LA family on its last leg, and much of their activities have been unknown since. By the 90s, the LA family was estimated to have 20 official members, most of whom, however, have been ineffective for years because the group hasn't been able to enforce its territorial control. Now their numbers are estimated at half that. Law enforcement for the most part considers them defunct and has moved their attention to organized crime towards ethnic street gangs, which are far more prevalent and widespread, effectively resigning the Italian mafia to the history books.